It's your turn, not tomorrow, not someday, not when everything feels perfect. Right now, for a long time, you've been watching other people step forward. You've seen them take chances, speak up, build something, change their lives. And maybe you've told yourself they're different. Maybe you've convinced yourself they had more luck, more confidence, more support. But the truth is simpler than that. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't wait to feel ready. They didn't wait for fear to disappear. No. They just decided that staying where they were hurt more than stepping into the unknown. And that same decision is sitting in front of you right now. Because let's be honest, you already know what you want. You already know what you've been putting off. That idea you keep revisiting, that goal you keep delaying, that version of yourself you keep saying and one die about. The question is not whether you can. The question is whether you will. There's a moment in every life where everything quietly shifts. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't come with applause. It comes in silence when you're alone with your thoughts, realizing that nothing around you will change unless you change first. And that moment is here. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to move with fear. Fear is not a stop sign. It's a signal that you're stepping into something that matters. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't feel it. Think about it. Every person you admire once stood exactly where you are standing now, unsure, hesitant, questioning themselves. The difference is they didn't let that feeling make decisions for them. They took the first step anyway. And that's what separates intention from transformation. You can spend years planning, preparing, waiting for the perfect timing, but time doesn't reward waiting. Time rewards action. Even imperfect action, even messy action, especially the kind of action that scares you a little, because that's where growth actually happens. You won't feel fully ready. That version of a ready you're waiting for doesn't exist. Confidence is not something you find. It's something you build after you start, not before. And yes, you might fail. You might stumble. You might look back and wonder if you made the right choice. But here's something most people don't realize. Staying the same is also a decision. And it comes with its own cost. The cost of regret. The cost of wondering, oh, what if? The cost of seeing time pass while you stay exactly where you are. So ask yourself honestly, what is worse? Trying and failing or never trying at all? You don't need a perfect plan. You need a starting point. One decision, one action, one step that breaks the cycle of delay. Send the message, start the work, apply for the opportunity, learn the skill, speak up, show up. Not because everything is guaranteed to work out, but because you are no longer willing to let hesitation run your life. There will never be a better version of a now than now. And if you're waiting for a sign, this is it. You don't need more time. You need momentum. And momentum begins the moment you stop negotiating with your fear and start moving anyway. So go ahead, take that step you've been avoiding. Not because it's easy, but because it matters. Because this is your life, your chance, your turn. And the only question left is simple. What will you do with it? Many people spend a large part of their lives believing that the right moment is still ahead of them, that conditions will eventually align in a way that makes everything easier, safer, and more predictable. This belief creates a quiet delay that often feels harmless at first, but over time it becomes a pattern that shapes decisions, habits, and even identity. Waiting starts to replace doing, and hesitation slowly becomes normal. The idea of a perfect time feels comforting because it gives the illusion that success is not being denied, only postponed. But in reality, that perfect time rarely arrives in the way people imagine it. Life does not pause until everything is ideal. Circumstances continue to shift, responsibilities grow, and uncertainties never fully disappear. What keeps many people stuck is not a lack of opportunity, but the expectation that opportunity should come with complete clarity and minimal risk. There is often a desire for everything to feel fully under control before taking the first step. However, that level of certainty is not how progress works. Most meaningful changes begin in situations that are slightly unclear, where outcomes are not fully guaranteed and where some level of discomfort is unavoidable. The waiting mindset convinces a person that delay is preparation, but preparation without action eventually becomes avoidance. Time passes in a way that feels slow in the moment but becomes surprising when looking back. Weeks turn into months, and months into years, while plans remain in a mental space rather than a physical reality. During this time, the belief that as soon as enough becomes stronger even when no real movement is happening. The truth is that waiting does not remove fear. It only extends the period in which fear exists without resolution. The longer someone waits, the more intimidating the first step can feel, because imagination tends to exaggerate difficulty over time. There is also a psychological comfort in postponement. As long as something has not been attempted, there is still room to imagine a perfect outcome. Starting removes that illusion and replaces it with reality, which includes learning, adjusting, and sometimes failing. This is why delay often feels easier than action, even when action is exactly what is needed. But ease in the short term often leads to difficulty in the long term, because unstarted goals do not disappear. They remain as unfinished thoughts that quietly weigh on the mind. Many people misunderstand readiness. They assume readiness is a feeling that appears before action, a moment when confidence becomes strong enough to eliminate doubt. In reality, readiness is not a starting condition, but a result of engagement. It grows through exposure, repetition, and experience. The first step does not require certainty. It requires willingness. And willingness often exists long before confidence does. Even if it is not recognized, the idea of perfect timing also ignores how unpredictable life naturally is. External conditions will always have variations, challenges, and interruptions. There is rarely a version of life where everything is perfectly aligned for action without resistance. If someone waits for complete stability, they may find themselves waiting indefinitely, because stability is temporary and constantly shifting. Even when conditions improve, new uncertainties appear. This cycle shows that waiting for external perfection is not a reliable strategy for progress. What actually changes a situation is movement. Even small action breaks the pattern of delay and creates feedback from reality. Instead of imagining outcomes, a person begins to experience them, adjust to them, and learn from them. This shift from thinking to doing is what transforms potential into progress. Without it, ideas remain abstract and disconnected from real development. The belief that there will be a better moment later often leads to missed opportunities that cannot always be recovered. Some chances are time-sensitive, while others lose emotional momentum if not acted upon. The longer something is postponed, the more difficult it becomes to reconnect with the original motivation. Over time, energy fades, priorities shift, and what once felt urgent becomes distant. Ultimately, the decision to stop waiting is not about eliminating fear or uncertainty, but about refusing to let them control direction. Life does not offer guarantees for timing, but it always offers the ability to act within the present. The present moment is the only point where change is actually possible. Every future outcome is built from what is chosen now, not from what is planned indefinitely for later. Fear is something that appears in almost every important moment of change, yet it is often misunderstood as a signal to stop rather than a sign to proceed carefully. It tends to show up when a person is standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, something that requires growth beyond what is already known and comfortable. Instead of meaning danger in the literal sense, it often reflects the mind's awareness that a shift is about to take place. The human brain is naturally designed to seek safety and predictability, so anything that introduces uncertainty can trigger resistance. That resistance is what is commonly experienced as fear. Many people interpret this feeling as a warning that they are not capable or not ready, but fear does not measure ability. It measures unfamiliarity. When someone is about to speak publicly for the first time, start a new venture, move to a different environment, or express an honest opinion that matters deeply to them, the nervous system reacts because it cannot fully predict the outcome. This reaction is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence that the situation carries importance. If something did not matter, it would not create emotional tension. Fear often becomes stronger when a person gives it authority over decision-making. The moment fear is treated as a command instead of a sensation, it begins to shape behavior. Choices become limited, not because options are unavailable, but because hesitation begins to filter them out. Over time, this creates a pattern where comfort is prioritized over growth. The challenge is that comfort rarely leads to expansion. It maintains the current state while growth requires stepping into discomfort repeatedly until it becomes familiar. What is often overlooked is that fear and progress are closely linked. Almost every meaningful achievement is preceded by uncertainty. Whether it is learning a new skill, building a career, forming relationships, or pursuing personal goals, there is always a stage where confidence has not yet caught up with intention. In that stage, fear is present because the outcome is not guaranteed. However, the presence of fear does not mean the absence of capability. It simply means the capability has not yet been fully tested in that specific context. There is also a misconception that fearless people exist. In reality, most people who appear fearless have simply learned how to act while feeling fear. The difference is not the absence of emotion, but the relationship with it. Instead of treating fear as a barrier, they treat it as background noise. It may still be present, but it no longer dictates direction. This shift takes practice, and it usually begins with small decisions that gradually build tolerance for uncertainty. When fear arises, it often brings exaggerated thoughts about possible failure. The mind tends to project worst-case scenarios more vividly than neutral or positive outcomes. This is not because failure is inevitable, but because the brain is trying to prepare for risk. However, these projections are not predictions. They are possibilities, and possibilities are not the same as reality. Many things that feel overwhelming in thought become manageable in action once they are actually faced. Avoiding fear might provide temporary relief, but it often reinforces influence. Each time avoidance is chosen, the mind learns that discomfort should be escaped rather than navigated. Over time, this makes similar situations feel even more intimidating. On the other hand, facing fear in small, controlled steps gradually reduces its intensity. The experience teaches the mind that discomfort does not automatically lead to harm, and that understanding grows through exposure rather than avoidance. There's a deeper layer to fear that often goes unnoticed. It frequently appears at the boundary when a personal development, when a person is close to expanding their identity. Growth requires leaving behind certain versions of self that feel familiar but limited. Fear signals that this transition is occurring. It is not a sign that the path is wrong, but that the path is new. Newness always carries uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally produces emotional resistance. Over time, as experience accumulates, situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. This does not mean fear disappears entirely, but its intensity decreases as familiarity increases. What once felt like a major obstacle becomes part of normal experience. This shift happens not through waiting for confidence, but through repeated engagement despite discomfort. The important realization is that fear does not need to be eliminated before action can take place. It can exist alongside action without controlling it. Movement does not require emotional certainty. It requires decision. And decisions made in the presence of fear often become turning points because they represent a conscious choice to prioritize growth over hesitation. Confidence is often imagined as something people either have or do not have, as if it were a fixed trait that determines what a person is capable of doing. This belief creates a major misunderstanding because it leads many to assume they must wait until they feel fully certain before they can begin anything meaningful. In reality, confidence is not a starting point, but a developing result. It grows gradually through experience, repetition, and exposure to situations that once felt unfamiliar or challenging. At the beginning of any new journey, uncertainty is almost always present. When someone attempts something for the first time, whether it is speaking in front of others, learning a skill, starting a project, or making an important life decision, there is rarely a strong sense of inner assurance. Instead, there is hesitation, doubt, and awareness of possible failure. This is not a sign of inability. It is simply the natural state of inexperience. No one begins at a level of mastery, and no one feels fully prepared before their first attempt. The key misunderstanding comes from expecting confidence to appear before action. Many people wait for a feeling of readiness that never truly arrives in advance. They imagine that at some point fear will completely disappear and certainty will take its place. However, that moment is largely an illusion. Confidence does not come as a sudden transformation. It develops slowly as a result of taking action despite uncertainty. Each step forward, even a small one, begins to reshape how the mind interprets capability. When a person takes action without feeling fully confident, they create evidence for themselves. That evidence becomes the foundation for future belief. The first attempt might feel shaky, the second slightly more stable, and the third more familiar. Over time, repetition builds familiarity, and familiarity reduces hesitation. What once felt impossible begins to feel manageable, not because the task has changed, but because the person has changed through experience. Confidence is closely linked to learning. Every time someone tries, fails, adjusts, and tries again, they are building a deeper understanding of both the task and their own ability to handle it. This process transforms uncertainty into skill. The mind begins to recognize patterns, anticipate challenges, and respond with greater ease. In this way, confidence becomes a byproduct of engagement rather than a prerequisite for it. There is also an important shift that happens when action replaces waiting. While waiting, the mind often exaggerates difficulty and creates scenarios that increase doubt. The imagination fills in gaps with uncertainty, which can make tasks feel larger or more intimidating than they actually are. But once action begins, reality replaces imagination. Actual experience is often more structured and manageable than anticipated fear suggested. This contrast between expectation and reality is one of the strongest ways confidence is built. Another important aspect is that confidence is not always loud or obvious. It does not always appear as boldness or certainty. Sometimes it is simply the willingness to continue despite discomfort. A person can feel nervous and still act. They can feel unsure and still progress. This quiet form of confidence is often more powerful than the visible kind, because it is rooted in persistence rather than emotion. As experience accumulates, the internal dialogue begins to change. Instead of asking, can I do this? The mind begins to ask, how can I do this better? This shift marks a significant transformation. It shows that energy is moving away from doubt and toward problem solving. That transition is where real confidence begins to take shape. It is not about eliminating all uncertainty, but about reducing its control over decision. Even setbacks play an important role in this process. Mistakes do not destroy confidence when they are understood correctly. Instead, they provide information. Each failure contains insight that can be used for improvement. When a person learns to interpret setbacks as part of learning rather than proof of incapability, confidence becomes more stable and resilient. It is no longer dependent on perfection, but grounded in growth. Over time, what once required intense mental effort begins to feel more natural. Actions that were once avoided become routine. Challenges that once created hesitation become opportunities for improvement. This transformation does not happen suddenly, but gradually through consistent engagement. The accumulation of small actions would eventually build strong self-belief. Ultimately, confidence is not something that must be obtained before starting. It is something that is developed through starting. It is shaped in the process of trying, adjusting, and continuing. And it becomes stronger, not in moments of certainty, but in moments where action is chosen despite uncertainty. Every person who is admired for their achievements, skills, or impact began from a point that looked far less certain than the version of them people eventually came to respect. It is easy to see someone at their peak and assume that they were always confident, always skilled, or always clear about their direction. From the outside, success often appears smooth and inevitable, as if it was simply a matter of talent meeting opportunity at the right time. However, this perspective ignores the long period of uncertainty, struggle, and invisibility that usually comes before recognition. In reality, most people start with doubt. They start without full knowledge of what they are doing, without mastery of the skills they will eventually become known for, and without assurance that their efforts will lead anywhere meaningful. At the beginning, there is often confusion rather than clarity. There is trial and error rather than precision. There is hesitation rather than certainty. The early stages of any journey are rarely impressive, and in many cases, they are filled with mistakes that later become part of the learning foundation. What is not visible in successful outcomes is the process of becoming. That process includes repeated attempts that do not work, ideas that fail to develop, and moments of self-questioning where progress feels slow or invisible. Many people who eventually succeed have gone through phases where they considered stopping, where they questioned their abilities, and where external results did not reflect internal effort. The difference is not that they avoided uncertainty, but that they continued within it long enough for things to change. Uncertainty at the beginning is not a sign of incompatibility with success. It is a universal starting condition. No one begins with complete understanding of their path. Even those who eventually become experts once had to learn basic steps, make simple mistakes, and rely on persistence rather than skill. The early version of any success story is usually marked by repetition, adjustment, and gradual improvement rather than immediate excellence. And it is also important to understand that growth is often slow at first. In the early stages, effort does not always translate into visible results. This can create the illusion that nothing is happening, even when progress is occurring beneath the surface. Skills take time to develop, and confidence takes time to build. Many people underestimate how long this stage lasts and overestimate how quickly results should appear. Because of this mismatch in expectation, some give up before the transformation becomes visible. Another common misunderstanding is that successful people were somehow more prepared from the start. In reality, preparation often develops through necessity. When someone commits to a goal, they are forced to learn what they do not yet know. They adapt, improve, and refine their approach through experience. The version of them that others admire is built over time, not present at the beginning. What looks like natural ability is often the result of repeated practice that is not seen by others. There is also a hidden emotional aspect to early stages that is rarely discussed. Starting something new often comes with feelings of inadequacy or comparison. It is easy to look at others who are further ahead and assume that the gap is evidence of limitation. However, that gap is simply a reflection of time and experience, not inherent ability. Everyone moves through stages at different speeds, and comparing the beginning of one journey to the middle or end of another creates a distorted perception of reality. Progress becomes clearer when viewed in stages rather than in comparison. The early stage is about learning, the middle stage is about improvement, and the later stage is about refinement. Each stage has its own challenges, and none of them are free from uncertainty. Even those who are already successful continue to face new situations where they must learn again. This shows that uncertainty is not something that disappears, but something that changes form as growth continues. What often separates those who eventually succeed from those who stop is not the absence of doubt, but the decision to continue despite it. Continuation through uncertainty creates familiarity. Familiarity reduces hesitation. Over time, what once felt intimidating becomes manageable, and what once felt unknown becomes understood. This shift does not happen instantly, but gradually through repeated exposure and effort. Looking back, many people who achieved meaningful outcomes recognized that they were not fully ready when they started. They realized that readiness was not a condition they had to meet beforehand, but something that developed because they started anyway. Their journey begins not with certainty, but with the decision to move forward despite uncertainty. And it is that decision, repeated over time, that eventually leads them to where they are seen today. Every choice to delay action carries consequences that are not always immediately visible, which is why inaction often feels harmless in the moment. When nothing is done, nothing appears to be lost on the surface, and this creates the illusion that waiting is neutral. However, time does not remain neutral. It continues moving forward regardless of whether progress is being made or not. And every moment spent not acting is a moment that cannot be recovered later. The cost of inaction is not always dramatic or sudden. It is gradual, quiet, and cumulative. One of the most significant effects of not taking action is the buildup of internal regret. Regret does not usually appear instantly. It forms slowly as awareness increases over time. At first, there's only delay, then repetition of delay, and eventually reflection on what could have been done differently. As time passes, the mind begins to compare present reality with imagined possibilities that were never pursued. This comparison often creates a lingering sense of dissatisfaction, not because life is entirely wrong, but because potential paths remain unexplored. There's also a psychological weight that comes from unfinished intentions. When a person repeatedly thinks about doing something but never acts on it, the idea does not disappear. Instead, it remains present in the background of thought, resurfacing during quiet moments. These unresolved intentions can accumulate, creating a sense of internal clutter where many ideas exist but few are realized. Over time, this can lead to frustration, not because of failure, but because of stagnation. Inaction also shapes identity in subtle ways. Every time a decision is postponed, the mind learns a pattern of hesitation. Over time, this pattern can become familiar, and familiarity can start to feel like personality. A person may begin to see themselves as someone who is not ready yet, or not the type who takes action, even though these are learned behaviors rather than fixed traits. The longer this pattern continues, the more difficult it can feel to break, because identity becomes linked with repetition. Another hidden cost is the narrowing of opportunities. Many opportunities are time-sensitive and depend on timing, context, and readiness to engage. When action is delayed, certain possibilities naturally disappear or are taken by others who are willing to act earlier. Life does not pause to wait for readiness. It continues to move, and opportunities move with it. Missing one opportunity does not mean everything is lost, but repeated delay can significantly reduce the number of chances available over time. There is also the emotional impact of watching others move forward. When a person remains inactive, while others take steps in their own lives, careers, or goals, comparison becomes more frequent. This comparison is not always about superiority or inferiority, but about awareness of missed progress. Seeing others advance can sometimes amplify internal doubt, not because others are doing something wrong, but because it highlights what has not yet been done personally. This can create a cycle where hesitation increases rather than decreases. Over time, inaction can also distort perception of effort. The longer something is delayed, the larger and more intimidating it can appear in the mind. Tasks that might have been manageable early on can feel overwhelming later simply because they have been avoided for too long. This is not because the task has changed, but because mental distance has increased. What is not practiced or attempted often grows in perceived difficulty. Another consequence of staying in the same place is the loss of learning through experience. Progress is not only about outcomes, but about the knowledge gained through doing. When action is avoided, that learning does not occur. Ideas remain theoretical instead of becoming practical understanding. Without experience, growth becomes limited to thinking rather than doing, and thinking alone cannot fully replace lived experience. There is also the issue of momentum. Action creates movement, and movement often leads to further movement. When nothing is done, momentum does not build. Instead, stillness reinforces itself. Starting is often the most difficult part, but it is also the point at which momentum begins to form. Without that initial push, energy remains unused and potential remains inactive. Over time, the accumulation of these small effects leads to a larger realization. The cost of not acting is not just about one missed moment, but about the collection of many moments that could have shaped a different path. It is not always about dramatic failure, but about quiet absence of progress. Ooh. And eventually, this awareness becomes clearer when looking back, when it becomes easier to see how much time passed without direction. What makes inaction powerful is that it does not feel like a decision at first, yet it still produces outcome. Choosing not to act still leads somewhere, even if that place is simply continued sameness. And over time, the realization grows that staying where nothing changes also requires effort, just not the kind that leads to growth. In the end, the cost of inaction is measured not only in lost opportunities, but in the distance between what was possible and what was actually done. The idea that the right moment will arrive later often creates a quiet delay in action, but in reality, the only moment that ever truly exists is the one unfolding right now. Everything a person will ever do, change, or build begins from this single point in time. It does not begin in the past, and it cannot begin in a future that has not yet arrived. Waiting for a perfect version of circumstances often leads to overlooking the power already available in the present moment, even if that moment feels ordinary or uncertain. Starting now does not require perfect conditions. It requires the willingness to move despite incomplete information, despite hesitation, and despite the natural discomfort that comes with beginning something new. Many people underestimate how small beginnings shape large outcomes. They imagine that meaningful change must start with dramatic action, but in reality, most transformation begins quietly, with simple decisions that may seem insignificant at first. A single attempt, a brief effort, or a small adjustment can initiate a process that gradually builds direction and momentum. Momentum is not created by intensity alone, but by continuity. When action is taken, even in a limited way, it breaks the pattern of stillness. That break is important because stillness tends to reinforce itself over time. When nothing changes, the mind becomes accustomed to inactivity and hesitation becomes familiar. But once movement begins, even at a minimal level, it introduces a new pattern. That pattern is easier to sustain than to initiate, which is why the first step often feels the most difficult. There's a tendency to overestimate what must be achieved immediately and underestimate what consistent small actions can produce over time. Large outcomes are rarely the result of a single effort. They are the accumulation of repeated steps that build upon one another. Each step may not feel significant in isolation, but together they form progress that becomes visible only after enough time has passed. The misunderstanding often lies in expecting immediate transformation when in reality transformation is usually gradual. Starting now also changes perception. Before action, problems often exist as abstract thoughts, which can feel heavier and more complex than they actually are. Once action begins, those same problems are experienced in reality, where they become more structured and manageable. This shift from imagination to experience reduces uncertainty because real engagement provides feedback. That feedback helps adjust direction, improve understanding, and clarify what actually needs to be done next. Another important aspect of beginning now is that delay does not eliminate difficulty. It often increases it. Tasks that are postponed tend to grow in mental weight, not because they have become objectively harder, but because distance from them increases hesitation. The longer something remains untouched, the more the mind builds assumptions around it. These assumptions often exaggerate complexity and reduce confidence. Starting early prevents this accumulation of imagined difficulty and replaces it with real experience. There is also value in imperfect beginnings. Waiting for complete readiness often prevents progress altogether, because readiness is not a fixed state that arrives in full before action. It develops through engagement. When a person begins without feeling fully prepared, they create an environment where learning becomes active rather than theoretical. Mistakes that occur during early attempts are not setbacks in the true sense. They are information that guides improvement. Without beginning, that information never becomes available. Every moment of hesitation is also a moment where potential action is paused. While reflection has its place, prolonged delay can turn reflection into stagnation. The difference between thinking and doing is what determines whether ideas remain internal or become real. Action transforms possibility into experience. Without that transition, even strong intentions remain untested and unformed. Starting now does not guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees movement. Movement is essential because it shifts a person from imagining outcomes to interacting with them. Through interaction, understanding deepens, confidence grows, and direction becomes clearer. Even when outcomes are not perfect, progress itself becomes a source of learning that refines future effort. What often holds people back is the belief that starting must feel right before it is done. In practice, starting often feels uncertain, slightly uncomfortable, and incomplete. That feeling is not a signal to stop. It is a normal part of beginning anything meaningful. The expectation that action should feel easy at the start creates unnecessary delay, while accepting discomfort as part of initiation allows progress to begin immediately. Ultimately, the present moment holds everything needed to take the first step. It may not contain certainty, but it contains opportunity. It may not provide full clarity, but it provides access to movement. Once movement begins, everything else starts to develop through experience. The path does not reveal itself before the first step. It becomes visible because of the first step. And in the end, everything comes down to this simple truth. Nothing changes until you do. Not your circumstances, not your mindset, not your future. The only real power you have is in what you choose to do with this moment. You don't need everything to be perfect, you just need to begin. Because once you start, even in the smallest way, you step out of waiting and into living. And that is where real change finally begins.